Blood is truthful, and the splattered across the fence posts of Thaddeus Whitmore told a tale he was unwilling to read because nothing had bothered them for 12 years. His pasture was quiet save for the wind and livestock, but she was collapsed. There, her outfit against the old wood shredded, hardly breathing, but a live thorn had constructed this seclusion. Purposefully following the events that transpired with his family, following the fire, following the charges that trailed him like smoke, he had selected this void with no neighbors. Miles without any guests or issues, only him, his livestock, and the sort of tranquility that results from being overlooked by he stood 30 feet away with a firearm. Free in his grasp as he examined the woman who had meticulously broken his, created a sense of isolation that she couldn't be, over 30 dark hairs that are tangled with dirt as her hands pushed against something darker. Against the ripped cloth at her side, and she hadn't noticed blood seeping through seam, but her face was closed. Every instinct is as pale as morning frost. Yelled for him to turn around and return to the house as if he hadn't seen her. In his experience, he only helped strangers. Brought problems, yet it was trouble that caused it. Anything that Thorne. Whitmore had vowed to avoid return to his life, but she made a tiny sound as they moved against the fence. Escaped the ache in her lips, combined with anything about that sound cut that was exhausting. After 12 years of meticulous wall construction, he noticed that he was moving forward. Afterward, she opened her eyes again when his shadow touched her emerald eyes. Keen in spite of the discomfort, and they focused on him with a mix of desperation and terror, hope that caused his chest to constrict. Attempted to talk, but was only able to hint that he was unable to fully capture Thorne. Keeping the rifle across while crouching, keeping his knees apart even as he drew nearer till he could see the severity of her wounds on her bruises on her jaw and arms, and that wound that had soaked on her side someone had injured her through. Her clothing. Sadly, she was able to talk before her rough and cracking voice. Please, there come. Those two phrases altered everything, as if someone were about to, if this woman was being hunted, then his 12 years of tranquility were coming to an end. Whether or not he assisted her, and Thor Whitmore would soon have to deal with the one decision he had avoided for more than 10 years, interfering in another person's dispute. However, as he examined those needy green eyes, he understood that the decision might already be prepared for Thorne's initial "my first impulse was to abandon her there." The second was to assist his third. That prevailed was obtaining answers prior to he was slain by either choice. "Who's approaching?" he inquired. Looking at the horizon where dust clouds might conceal themselves, she attempted to sit up as she approached bikers, wincing more erectly as the motion drawn at her injuries by Dead Rock Men Canyon may have 3 or 4 of them. Voice held a tone of fatigue. That resulted from long, intense running. I've been being followed since yesterday. Thorne knew the location of Dead Rock Canyon, a 40-mile south hamlet renowned for 2 items: the mining of silver and the type of men who didn't inquire about a person's history. If she fled from it, she had either taken a valuable item or noticed something she shouldn't have seen what you did. The question was raised out more forcefully than he had planned, yet 12 years of seclusion had eroded the most of his. Her eyes glittered with social flair. Something somewhere between hurt and rage gives you the impression that I did something wrong, since innocent people typically don't blood against my fence post in the end. She turned her head away from the murderer's track. Her jaw tensed briefly as he believed she wouldn't respond, but then she talked so softly that he had to bend over. To learn that I witnessed them kill a family. The Hendersons claimed to have a claim close to the canyon, discovered something that was worth dying for. She pressed with trembling hands. Pressed closer to her side. I was there to purchase goods in the incorrect location. Thorne examined her face for a moment, searching for the signs that would identify her as dishonest. He had become adept at interpreting people's the years prior to when the seclusion had to be in his profession. Yet her gaze held steady, and her voice trembled, sounded more like anguish than deceit. He said, "You ran. What else was I intended to remain and allow them to remain silent, the sole observer?" She looked him in the eye. "Once more, they murdered an entire family over what do you think of what the Hendersons discovered? They wouldn't want to murder another individual. A noise floated over the plains. Far off but distinct hoofbeats, hard-thorn roses, are ridden by several horses. To his feet, eyes scanning, weapon ready, there are perhaps 2 dust clouds on the horizon. Kilometers away, speeding in his direction like she would, property 4 riders, the woman, whom he had yet to meet, said name found it difficult to remain on the fence. Seeking assistance, please, she muttered. I won't cause you any problems. Simply point me out toward the river, and I'll continue to run. However, already, Thorn was figuring out 4 armed men who were presumably desperate to hide their footprints if they would murder a family for whatever Henderson's discovered. They refused to abandon Lucan, and now that they'd followed her to his property, where he was already, whether he enjoyed it or not, in less time, hoofbeats were becoming closer. Those riders would crest in less than 10 minutes. They would see her on the hill and notice his rat. Thor Whitmore would be there when they saw him. Must determine if 12 years of quiet seclusion was worth dying for. Thorn made his choice in that area. In between a heartbeat and the subsequent one, since he was courageous, and most definitely not he made it because he was stupid. Due to his recognition of something in the same desperate, cornered look in the woman's eyes, what he had observed in his own reflection. 12. Can you walk? He questioned years ago. She nodded through the way, already in motion. She held on to the suggested fence post. Strolling would be more ideal than practical. My name's Seraphina Caldwell, she stated. He put his arm around her waist. Bearing the weight of Sarah Thor Whitmore, we're going to get really familiar with my root cellar. His insurance coverage was sold by the vendor. Concealed area. Beneath the kitchen floor where he had kept provisions for emergencies, and where would he hide if he was telling the truth? Should his past ever resurface, he would never thought to conceal someone else as they rushed to Sarah's residence. Her legs gave out as she staggered without believing that Thorn carried her away. The remaining gap between her fragile and lighter than he had anticipated in a manner that caused his chest to constrict within. He had buried the hoof of emotion. Years ago, beats were now sufficiently close and louder that he was able to differentiate between Thorn sat Sarah on the horses inside the house, down and raised the hidden trap. The cellar's door was little, but it was medicinal supplies of dry food and water commodities that he had come to appreciate getting ready the hard way. There's, he added, I'm helping her with the bandages down there. Stay down the ladder and take care of your wounds. Sarah, keep calm no matter what you hear. Took hold of his wrist before he could shut. Why are you helping me with the door? You don't know who I am, therefore you can't tell. Thorn glanced down at her, the truth. An upturned face revealed the true bewilderment. There, how much time had passed since someone had unexpectedly shown her kindness, anything in exchange. Perhaps I understand the expression of someone fleeing anything they are unable to combat, he stated. Silently, maybe I understand what it's like to have no other options. Prior to her, he shut the trap door before he could reply, and rearranged the rug over it. Horses were perhaps a minute away. He could now plainly hear them precisely as Sarah had stated. Riders after a lengthy chase, the horses are panting heavily. Thorn inspected his gun before proceeding to the horsemen, reached the top of the slope through the window and outstripping. Cloud of dust and rage, hard men were approaching his property, having tougher faces such as those who donned their aggression as though other males wore caps. The leader is a towering, scarred man. Extending from his ear to his lifted jaw his hand, stopping the group 50 even at that time, the yard from the home. Thorn could see the cold at a distance. The man's eyes were calculated. You, Whitmore, yelled the scarred man. Thorn entered his porch with his weapon in hand. Casually, but it depends on who asks. Our name is Kane Murdoch, and we are pursuing a have you seen any dangerous criminal women? Occasionally pass through. It was the deception that would compel Thorn to make a decision between his conscience and his safety, due of his ability to see into Murdoch's eyes that this man has already killed and would kill without hesitation once more. Thorn had previously lied during the conflict. Following the conflict and during the gloomy years that, when truth was considered a luxury, He had no choice but to stand on his. He noticed the porch facing Kane Murdoch. He would lose everything because of this falsehood. Constructed haven't seen anyone in weeks. Thorn spoke steadily in spite of the rifle's weight in his grip. It's lonely here, but I enjoy it that way. Murdoch's eyes squinted as he scanned it. The land, with the diligence of a man who had pursued prey in front of his eyes, remained on the pillars of the fence where the blood of Sarah had turned dark against the Murdoch, mentioned something amusing about weathered wood. With accustomed ease, we dismount traced her path all the way to the woman's property line. Blood trail was ached a lot as she went through the last 3 riders dispersed, not precisely menacing, but positioned as men who were aware of how conflicts ended. Thorn identified the group. He'd utilized it in a different lifeblood, maybe from anything, Thorn said. Coyotes may regularly hunt through this area. Something entangled your lady. With Murdoch's teeth grinned, but it was the kind of the smile that came before the violin. If we only to calm our minds, look around. Thorn was unable to see the request. That Murdoch's hand was resting in close to his firearm in the other. Men's Path observed all of his movements and searched whether he consented or not. His property, the sole query was if they would kill him before the country is free or after. Standing aside, Thorn remarked, "But I'd thank you for not upsetting my livestock." When Murdoch came closer, they spooked easily. Thorn noticed on the porch something that chilled his blood. The man's boots were covered in mud, but not just any. The characteristic red clay that only mud originated in a single location within this region. The Henderson was covered in the same clay. Sarah had land close to Deadrock Canyon. Having been honest, Murdoch was near. Thorn could now detect enough of his breath smells of stale whiskey. This dried blood beneath his fingernails wasn't only a murderer, but a man who liked what he did. Great location you got, Whitmore. Here? Murdoch murmured, his eyes observing every aspect of the house. A quiet, intimate setting where a guy may conceal objects or individuals. I'm a Thorn said, simple rancher, don't are quite useful for concealing things. Murdoch, a simple rancher, laughed. That's the opinions of everyone, but you know what I believe you have secrets, and I can detect their scent on you or another from close to the barn, riders yelled. Kane discovered someone's new horse footprints. Did Thorn's mind race recently? His own tracks from this would be those. A ride in the morning to inspect the fence line, however, Murdoch would be unaware of that, and in the man's present state of mind was probably going to presume that Murdoch's hand moved in the worst possible way. Thought you stated you were closer to his pistol. I stated that I hadn't seen anyone. Nobody claimed that I hadn't left my own property, Thorn said quietly, but his finger landed on his trigger. I sent a rifle out to inspect my fence line. I discovered some damaged posts this morning. Very likely the same creature who departed that blood over an extended period of time. The 2 males looked at one another, and Thorn sensed the gravity of the situation, the awful equilibrium between the truth and the lies, between safety and disaster. Compared to Murdoch grinned once more, and Thorn was aware of it. Whatever transpired after his 12 years of violence was on the verge of ending the calm. When Murdoch emerged onto the scene, tensions the porch without permission, that one act passed a line where blood had been drawn by Thorn. 12 years ago, nobody went inside his refuge without authorization. Let's get a peek inside, Murdoch remarked. His hand is now openly resting on his gun. Thorn lifted his rifle just a bit. Quite dangerous, yet sufficiently near to make his stance. Is clear, and I prefer that you didn't. Murdoch's 3 men moved without asking. Closer to their goals as stated in the how they arranged themselves, which was going to turn into a brawl, and they all was aware of it. But before anyone could sketch, a fresh sound pierced the tense hoof. Beats are swiftly moving in from the east, a lone rider vigorously pushing his horse. Murdoch swore over the broad ground. His focus was split between amid Thorn and the impending stranger. During that distraction, Thorn saw something briefly. That caused him to feel sad. One of Murdoch's troops were researching the terrain. Thorn, near the porch, along a trail, knew there were droplets, even if they were invisible, of Sarah's blood heading in the direction of the home. The biker who was approaching topped the thorn and ridge could plainly see him. Now a young man, about 25, with intense urgency that originated from he, pulled up hard with grim news. His horse lethered in ahead of the pack, and Kane, the young man, was breathing heavily. Sighed. We have issues back in the Deadrock. Sheriff is posing inquiries. Someone gave a tip regarding the Henderson location. Murdoch's face darkened as he removed him. Fury, what kinds of inquiries are they? That, if we don't clean, end with a rope. The young man's eyes darted up quickly. Return to Murdoch after Thorn. Thorn thought, to ride now for a moment. There was now hope that Murdoch would be compelled to give up his search and transaction with the greater danger. But then Murdoch looked down at the drips of blood flowing toward the residence, and his expression changed to anything exponentially. More hazardous, Curtis, Murdoch told the man who was following the "What did you find?" Curtis asked about the blood trail. Pointing at the blood trail in the home takes you directly to the front door, where she is. Thorn felt the words physically. Blow, his dishonesty had been exposed, and 4 armed assassins now stood between he and the woman he had pledged to. Keep safe. Even worse, they were desperate guys in the midst of a hangman's noose. If they failed to keep quiet, if you were Thorn, what would each witness say? Would you engage in combat with 4 armed men to try to protect a woman you don't really know? To bargain for your release and hope they tell me, spare both of your lives. In the pleas, let me know which side you would choose. Due to Thorn's subsequent decision would decide if either of them. Murdoch pulled out his revolver and lived to see the sunset. Move at a deliberate pace to draw her out. Do it now, Whitmore, and perhaps we can make Thorn, this is quick for you both, was already relocating after 12 years of in an instant, isolation was removed, exposing the person he was before, a man who had discovered that occasionally the decision to battle Thorn's rifle broke like Curtis and Thunder dropped earlier. The shot reverberated as his rifle cleared leather, like a verdict across the prairies, and suddenly, the peaceful ranch turned into a Murdoch on the battlefield, jumped behind his Thorn's second shot split the horse. Where his head had been on the porch post, the other 2 men dispersed in search of concealment behind the barn and water trough. Years of muscle memory began to take effect. The rifle action was operated by Thorn's hands, swift and fluid as he had learned in the conflict, as he had hoped he would never use once more. You choose the incorrect side, yelled Whitmore Murdoch from behind his "This is all for a woman." You don't even realize that Thorn didn't waste time on in response. He inserted a round into the water by launching the man behind it, frantically trying to better hide the youthful messenger who is obviously unaccustomed to. His horse had been wheeled by gunfights and was returning to the ridge while riding hard. Seems to have decided that whatever waited was better than thorns in bedrock. Murdoch, the smart boy with the rifle, showed up, blazing shots from his horse's flank, pistol splinters from the porch railing that were nibbled. Thorn fell flat and rolled behind the sturdy wooden bench he had constructed, for he will never again have the peaceful evenings that the ensuing quiet was worse than the. Thorn counted the number of rounds fired. Angles attempted to recall all he'd discovered how to survive when outnumbered Murdoch and the 2 remaining men. 2 of them with unobstructed views of the house he would hear if he presented himself. The sound caused his blood to freeze. "Don't," he said as the trapdoor creaked open. Called out, but Sarah's call came too late. A feeble voice floated up from the cellar, but made the decision to "let me help I can." "Shoot, remain motionless." Thorn growled, but already she was scaling a handgun and he held his spare Colt in her hand. Murdoch heard in the emergency supplies the conversation and made a noise that sounded like shattering glass. "That's right. Girl, hurry up. Let's wrap up what we began at the." Sarah suddenly emerged next to Henderson Place. Although Thorn's face was pallid, her hand's blood had drenched the gun's steadiness through the temporary dressing she'd applied, but her eyes ached from anything more than suffering they slaughtered. As she whispered to Thorn, "Little girl." At the age of 8, Sarah Henderson killed her. After witnessing them kill, Thorn was struck by her parents' statements as unexpectedly shoots an 8-year-old child. This was not a case of stranger protection. Rather, it was about fairness for these men had slaughtered innocent people. How many rounds do you have?" Thorne inquired. 5 load the firearm along with whatever's in your Thorne checked his rifle's belt and said, 3. There are 2 rounds remaining against Murdoch. Seasoned murderers, it wouldn't be sufficient for a direct fight. However, he recalled something from the previous mining. He stored a bomb in the barn for removing stumps is risky for storage. Although useful for purposes other than relocating, can you keep them occupied for 2 rocks minutes? He inquired, but Sarah nodded. Her forehead was sweating from the discomfort. And what are you planning? Effort, something stupid. Thorne looked at the 30 yards of open space separate the barn from a place where the 3 men could chop him down, but perhaps foolish enough to. He glanced at this woman he had known at work. This stranger spent less than an hour who had reintroduced violence into her environment could be well organized. Remained covert could have allowed him to confront this alone. She had decided to stand instead. He asked Sarah whether she was ready. She took a position in the corner of the Sarah's porch, Colt solid in her hands. Henderson Thorne ran in the direction of the barn when Sarah fired her shots, requiring Murdoch and his associates to maintain 30 yards with their heads down, but they had never appeared thus far, and Thorne was aware that any second one of those murderers would take a chance. Sarah's shots for a precise hit on his Thorne's rear boots struck the barn floor. He closed his ears as a gunshot whistled by. Sufficient to sense the warmth behind him, Sarah's Colt continued to bark consistently, maintaining the sincere killer's. He swam for the corner, where he stored the hands of the mining supplies, anxiously looking for the little wooden box with a skull, and there are 2 sticks of dynamite and crossbones. There are enough unbroken fuses to level half the barn or reverse this situation. His fingers struggled to find the matches as the barn was penetrated by another bullet. Splinters flying from the wall at him. Sarah's shooting had ceased outside. She was either down or reloading. Thorne was too busy to find out. It caused him to shake as he lighted the first fuse. Uses a keen hand to catch the spark. It blew after 20 or 30 seconds of hissing. He ran back toward the door of the barn. Rifle in one hand, explosives in the other, Sarah remained alive, squatting. Behind blood flowing on the porch, railing down her arm from a new cut, she noticed he came out of the barn and nodded. Recognized his plans. Murdoch's voice could be heard over the Whitmore. Give up the ranch. You're send the female, outmanned and outgunned. Out, and I might instead let you live. Thorne threw the dynamite in response, in the direction of the water trough where 2 of the stick had been covered by Murdoch's men. Fuse that was flipped end over end and sparking like the explosion destroyed a fallen star. Dirt and debris are being sent by the morning breeze up into the sky in a huge eruption as the one of Murdoch's guys was cleansed of dust. The other was still on the ground, crawling away, bloodied and shocked, but Murdoch had himself taken advantage of the disarray to progress. And then all of a sudden he was on the porch. Sarah's head fell with the steps, pistol focused on it. The face of Whitmore Murdoch was a mask of desperation and fury. Let it go or I'll paint. Her thorn-frozen brains on your porch rifle 30 feet from his shoulder kept him away from Murdoch. But it could additionally been 30 meters at this range. The Sarah gazed at the killer, who couldn't miss her, over that impossibly long distance. Thorne and something in her eyes caught his attention that caused his chest to constrict without dread. Acknowledgement that she had come to terms with dying, most likely returned to Dead Rock Canyon after she made the decision to be the witnesses, were unable to silence these murderers. Quietly, she said, "Don't allow him win." However, Murdoch was already exerting pressure. As soon as the second stick of dynamite that the lone Thorne had ignited but maintained rolled to a halt, concealed behind his back, Murdoch's gaze moved to the murderer's feet. Broad as he became aware of what was being placed, he had maybe 3 seconds to make a decision. Between aiming for Sarah and jumping for, he selected the incorrect cover, and the blast lifted Murdoch, threw him off his feet. Backward, his firearm whirling into the dust. When Thor's ears start to ring, the ranch was quiet as it faded. But for the breeze and the far-off location of Sarah was alive and disturbed by the frightened livestock. However, breathing, Murdoch remained still. Close to the porch's broken remains actions that the gunman who survived had vanished completely, most likely due to a decision because whatever the Deadrock sheriff might do to him was better than having to face. Thorne went carefully toward additional bombs. Sarah was sitting there, his rifle still ready, but no longer required. She raised her gaze to those green eyes of his that had altered everything, asking, "Is it over?" Invited Thorne to examine his demolished the crater, the broken porch. The ranch, the location of his water trough, was the blood seeping into the ground that had previously, he replied, "Just peace for 12 years. Lowering herself to assist her and standing, "It's over." Sheriff Morrison 3 days later came from Dead Rock Canyon carrying a posse and inquiries. He discovered Thorne fixing his porch as Sarah sat there. Her wounds are healing close by, yet her permanence in ways that none of they had made plans, and Morrison was a kind man. Truthful at a place where truthfulness was, he heard their story, which is frequently fatal. Inspected the corpses and gave a nod when Thorne gave the dynamite. To the person who Murdoch had been in possession of proof of the claim that had received the silver, Henderson was discovered dead by his relatives. For Morrison, a vain worth murdering Murdoch explained hefting the ore sample, and his team believed that they could get rid of the family and take the striking for themselves. They nearly received the sheriff's eyes remained after taking it away. On Sarah recovering from her wounds and the resolute expression on her face, "You ready to provide testimony in court regarding what?" "Every word," said Sarah. "Did you see?" "Sarah Henderson without hesitation warrants that much," Morrison said, nodding, and turned to face Thorne. "And you have quite the notoriety from your time in the war. Some people may question why a man with your abilities decided to remain hidden." Here, for Thorne's hands remained motionless on the he was planing wood occasionally. "A man must achieve tranquility before he can make you made a lot of money for other people. Murdoch's group was at ease here." Words that terrorize half the territory already sharing the word about what transpired. People may stop by to shake hands. Your hand, the idea of his guest's isolation being broken forever, should have frightened Thorne. Instead, he noticed that he was looking at Sarah, who was observing him with something that appeared to be hope after Morrison departed with his posse, taking the Thorne, bodies, and their gruesome proof, and Sarah took a seat on the partly restored porch as the sky was painted by sunset. "You may now go anywhere in hues of fire." Silently, Thorne replied, "Morrison offered to take you to Denver and assist you in beginning new where no one is familiar with your tale." Sarah was silent for a while, observing the cattle's movements over the grassland in the last of the light. "And you? I assume you'll act as usual." He stopped to tend to the livestock and work the ranch, then gave her a direct glance through it. "It strikes me that this location would benefit from the touch of a woman and perhaps some additional hands. Are you giving me a job offer for the work?" "I'd like to give you a house, Thorne Whitmore," Sarah's grin said. "If you want it." Dawn following. "The longest night I have been running so long that I have forgotten what home feels like. Is this?" And for the first time in 12 years, Thorne spoke 6 months later. He meant it. Passengers traversing the region would narrate tales of the tranquil ranch, where a green-eyed man and a scarred man, a woman, created something lovely out of they reared livestock from the ashes of violent youngsters, embraced strangers, and never mentioned the day when there was blood on the fence. Posts altered everything. But Thorne maintained his cleaned and prepared firearm, although he never had to use it once more after some battles. After you've earned some peace, stay one. Eternally remains the ranch that had protected a wounded soul and turned it into a shelter for two hearts that are healing, demonstrating that life's greatest things can occasionally start by having the guts to assist. If you're enjoying the moment, A Stranger in Need story, click to subscribe to the channel. On the screen's video to hear a narrative even more fantastic than this, one more profound and intense. The sort that causes your heart to pause and your spirit to race.